Good evening, our Patriot family, and welcome to another episode of the Fight for Patriotism, where we expose our government for their actions that they have done behind our backs. On tonight's episode, we are going to be discussing 3 operations that our government did and created false flags to basically blind us from what they were actually doing. I'm your producer, host, and brother Zachary Smouse, and with me is your Patriot brother Slow Country. I'll say the Bible verse, play my introduction, and check on how our brother is. The Bible verse for Wednesday, June 15, 2022 is, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom." James 3:13 NIV.
We need you now. We need you now. One day, one day, one day, I hope you see the truth. This puppet show stays on because of you. We've been dancing with the devil way too long. I know it's fun, but get ready to pay your dues. Oh God, come back home. This crazy world is filled with liars and abusers. We need you now before we're too far gone. I hope one day they finally see the truth. God, we need you now.
How are you doing this evening? And thank you for joining me.
How's it going, brother man? And everybody? Thanks for having me come up with you, Zach. So, what's first on the agenda? Is it the first one I sent you earlier, or are we going to go with?
So we are going to start off with Operation Washtub.
Awesome. And for those of you that don't know what Operation Washtub is, the Air Force and I think CIA, I think that's who it was. One of the intelligence apparatuses they used. They went to Alaska in the 50s and said, "Hey, we need to find a way to defend against communist attack." And they trained civilians.
In our time, no foreign army has ever occupied American soil, until now. That was the strapline and basic plot premise of John Milius's 1984 film, Red Dawn. The film depicts an imaginary communist invasion of mainland America, and the spontaneous resistance movement that springs up in Colorado. Go Wolverines. In the real world, however, the most likely territory for a Soviet landing would have been Alaska, separated from Siberia by the Bering Strait, only 52 miles wide. That's why, in early 1950, U.S. security agencies started to prepare for just such an invasion. I'm your host, David, and today we're going to talk about Operation Washtub, a joint effort between the Federal Bureau of Investigations and the Air Force Office of Special Investigations to create a secret stay-behind network of sleeper agents tasked with resisting a Soviet invasion in Alaska. This is the Cold War. Yes, I'm a gamer. No, I won't go to therapy. Speaking of gaming, today's sponsor is Conqueror's Blade, a free-to-play tactical MMO on PC set in a vast open medieval world and allows players to create a warlord, build and command an army, and conquer an empire. Warlords are created theme versus description for additional vault keys for the completion. In June 1948, U.S. State Department advisor George Kennan, who you already know from our episode on the Long Telegram, oversaw the creation of the Office of Policy Coordination, or OPC. This was a covert operations unit with the mission of setting up stay-behind networks of informants and resistance fighters in Western Europe. The goal of these operatives was to resist an invasion by the USSR and its allies, and they would be trained by local US and UK secret services and special forces. These are the Gladio networks. We've done a few episodes outlining them already. Now, it took more than a year before a similar operation was considered to be set up on US territory. The first recorded interagency meeting regarding Operation Washtub took place on the 27th of January 1950 in Fort Richardson, Alaska. FBI Special Agent John Williams, not the composer, and his deputy, Fred Frobisher, played host to Captain Heine, U.S. Navy Director of Intelligence for the Alaskan Command, Colonel Perry, U.S. Army Intelligence, Lieutenant Colonel Choose, his deputy, and Lieutenant Colonel Springer, U.S. Air Force Intelligence. The initiative to set up the meeting came from Captain Heine, but the overall idea for Washtub had been originated by General Twining and Armstrong of the Air Force. Williams and Frobisher informed their superior, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, without hiding their skepticism. But Hoover must have been interested, as his immediate reply read, "Keep the Bureau informed of any further developments." In May, the Air Force approached the CIA with the same idea. Albeit interested, the intelligence agency had to decline, as they did not have jurisdiction over the territory of Alaska. In June, the matter was discussed at an Interdepartmental Intelligence Conference, or IIC. Delegates agreed that the FBI should set up a stay-behind network tasked with obtaining and transmitting intelligence should Alaska fall into Soviet hands. On the 20th of the month, Hoover wrote to Special Agent Williams. He ordered him to get in touch with the Alaskan section of the Office of Special Investigations, the OSI, the Air Force's own intelligence service. Williams was asked to start cooperating with the OSI about setting up a sleeper network and to immediately evaluate the FBI's Alaskan informants as potential recruits. In July 1950, at another IIC meeting, it was proposed that the plan be expanded with an escape and evasion program, or E&E, to be managed by the OSI. This involved creating a support network to extract U.S. Air Force pilots shot down over Alaskan territory. By September, Washtub was gaining momentum as Hoover asked his men in Anchorage to set forth concrete proposals to put the plan in motion. The Alaskan divisions of the FBI and OSI worked out how to jointly manage the whole plan. The principal in charge of Washtub would be an OSI official with an FBI special agent as second in command. The OSI would oversee the recruitment and organization of the evasion and escape networks, while the FBI would do the same for the stay-behind operation proper, defined as the Covert Intelligence Section. Both agencies would co-lead on training and procurement of equipment. So, declassified FBI files reveal very clearly the composition of their network. Operatives were divided into cells, one cell per 5,000 citizens. Each cell would consist of one principal or leader, who then coordinated 4 to 6 agents. These agents had the authority to recruit sub-agents, provided that the identity of the cell principal was never revealed to them. Hoover himself spelled out the ideal traits of cell members. They had to be recruited from among unskilled or semi-skilled workers in urban areas, provided they weren't labor union officials. This type of personnel was less likely to be incarcerated, deported, or executed in the first days of a Soviet occupation. Another key factor was survivalist skills. To this respect, a memo from the OSI describes the ideal Washtub recruit as, quote, a professional photographer in Anchorage. He has only one arm and it's felt that he would not benefit the enemy in any labor battalion. He's an amateur radio operator. He's licensed as a hunting and fishing guide and well-versed in the art of survival. He is a pilot of a small aircraft and possessed of sufficient physical courage, as is indicated by his offer to guide a party which was to have hunted Kodiak bear armed with only bow and arrow, end quote. This individual is not named, of course, but I'd like to think of him as the Kodiak with the Kodak. And that's my quota of dad jokes for the episode. Probably. Other noteworthy candidates included one Mr. Gil McIntyre, store owner in Eek, Alaska, year of birth 1877. That would have made him 73 years old in 1950. So, yeah, forget about those teenaged Wolverine gorillas from Red Dawn. The special agents preferred to recruit middle-aged and elderly people, hiding in plain sight. What mattered was for the operative to be a keen outdoorsman, resourceful and resilient, with excellent knowledge of the terrain and top-notch survival skills. Amongst the recruits, many were enforcement officers with the Fish and Wildlife Service, former or current postal workers, as well as former or current pilots. One could think that the Inuits of Alaska, the Inupiat, would make perfect candidates for Washtub, but the declassified memos betray a clear mistrust for the locals. Several Inupiat settlements are considered for participation in the network, but FBI and OSI agents report that they don't have clear-cut allegiances, and living under Soviet occupation would not make any difference to them. One report even suspected that an Inupiat town may have been visited by Soviet spies, or at least some unknown white men who asked lots of questions to the locals. And what about female recruits? Well, point 6 of the FBI recruitment instructions settles the issue in clear terms. Quote, women will not be used in any operation contemplated by this plan, end quote. However, there is a letter from an OSI agent to an FBI colleague on the 25th of March, 1952, that considers as a candidate for the E&E program Mrs. Andrea Isabel Awe, former teacher, now gold dredger. Now, if I were a screenwriter in Los Angeles, I would probably pick her as my POV character for a perfect fish-out-of-water story, the only lady in a team of men selected to be trained for a top-secret FBI operation. Okay, now let's talk about training. Imagine Miss Awe, Mr. Kodiak with the Kodak, and the elderly McIntyre being transferred for their training. The recruits are taken to Anchorage, and from there, they fly to Washington, D.C. for the bulk of their training. FBI instructors give them a cool nickname, as is tradition. How about Lady Awesome, Kodiak Man, and Gramps? Yeah, the dad jokes aren't done. But since we are talking about the 1950s, it's the height of comedy. Plus, nicknames fulfill a very important function. They preserve the anonymity of the recruits. In the worst-case scenario, that is, interrogation and torture by the enemy, agents would not be able to reveal the identity of their colleagues. For the next few weeks, the team will learn every possible skill to harass an occupying force, collect intelligence, and expand a resistance network beyond the first few operatives. The training curriculum includes guerrilla techniques, firearms training, and close-quarter combat, encoding and decoding of messages, how to cook up cover stories and deceive the enemy, methods of observation, deduction, and communication, parachute school to be completed in Fort Benning, home of the U.S. Army Ranger School, by the way, how to identify Soviet military units, including aircraft and ships, and even 8 hours of bacteriological warfare. Finally, much importance is given to resisting methods of interrogation. The training memo clearly mentions that operatives would have a very slim chance to survive Soviet captivity. Agents would be most likely captured by the Red Army, which would then probably kill them after a few days or even hours. If they survive, prisoners would be referred to MVD agents for interrogation. And here, the instructor issues some sinister warnings. Quote, "The Soviets have always shown a cynical disregard for human life, and Soviet interrogation personnel are expected and required to produce results." End quote. Those are grim prospects. After training is complete, the Washtub operatives must receive their stash of material to be kept safe in a hidden cache. In our previous episodes on European stay-behind networks, we talked about weapons and equipment caches. These came in several versions and sizes. Some were hidden in the open, inside army barracks. Others were simple sealed boxes to be kept at home. But in most cases in Europe, they were in vaults or rooms hidden underground. The Alaskan network, however, is unique, as many of its caches were placed several feet above the ground to avoid them being buried under the snow. Essentially, they were safe boxes in remote locations placed on 14-foot stilts. In case of a Soviet landing in Alaska, Lady Awesome, Kodiak Man, and Gramps had orders to immediately reach their caches and start their mission. Their equipment included Arctic weather clothing, gasoline, maps, signaling mirrors, a canvas canoe, and a Mae West life jacket. Of course, that was for the survival part. To strike back at the invaders, Washtub operatives received a rifle with telescopic sight and sniper scope, a handgun with a silencer, a garroting wire, and enough explosives to demolish the cache, which bears a striking resemblance with my daughter's wish list on Amazon. Let me know in the comments if I should be proud or terrified. And it turns out I had one dad joke left. Probably. By July of 1951, the FBI and OSI had recruited 77 Washtub operatives, and the numbers kept on growing. The final number is disputed, but it's believed that about 100 caches, one per cell, were eventually established. The Soviet invasion, of course, never materialized. After 8 years, the FBI and OSI realized that the cost of the operation was just not justified, with each sleeper agent receiving a salary of $3,000. The initiative was terminated in 1959. The caches were maintained, however, until 1961, as they could be used as survival supplies for stranded pilots or hunters. They were then abandoned and presumably looted in their entirety, as they were never located. So this concludes our overview on Washtub, a stay-behind organization set up in reaction to the general fear and paranoia surrounding a Soviet invasion. For a bit more comparative context, watch our previous 3 episodes regarding clandestine networks in Europe and the Mediterranean. And stay tuned for further episodes. We'll be looking into more detail at the training and tactics of these operatives, and we will address the elephant in the cache. Were these organizations involved in state terrorism? We hope you enjoyed today's topic. My thanks to Arnaldo Theodorani for his work developing this episode.
So one thing that they neglect to talk about, he did talk about explosives, and he said there was enough to take care of the job. What they didn't tell everybody was that they were actually using Soviet munitions from the end of World War I all the way through the end of World War II. So that if these things were used, then it would look like sabotage or just a basic sabotage by their own officers or enlisted men. I thought that was pretty unique. From 1951 to 1957, the program was pretty heavily filtered. And then they started bringing in German munitions right around 1956. And very, very seldomly were they using American munitions other than, than pistols and rifles and such. So, yeah. Good to see you, Zach. Good to see you, Slow Country.
So on that note, that isn't the first time, or that's the first time we've done that, but we've done it since in every conflict that we've been through. We did it in as far as training civilians militarily to defend their own area. We did that in Korea. We also did it in Desert Storm. Although Desert Storm was kind of it was a weird one. They were using the U.S. Army, and I think they might have used a couple of units from the Marine Corps to train the Kuwaiti military and civilians. But the Kuwaiti military was primarily using the military operations, whereas the civilians were doing more of the intelligence side. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And Navy vet just said Spec Ops would use the enemy's weapons during the Vietnam War to lessen detection behind enemy lines. Exactly. You think about it. It's if you're using their own munitions against them, again, they're going to be looking at their own people as to internal espionage instead of sabotage from the citizens. See, now this is a conversation that Mooseman, I'm not sure if he's even around anymore. I haven't heard from him in quite a while. Okay. But Mooseman would probably know a bit about this as well. The thing we have to think about is when our government is literally working against us in more levels than one, what do? They use the enemies against the enemies. They're showing it to us now, where now we look at the situations that are going on today, and the U.S. is using the U.S. against Russia, against Ukraine, against so on and so forth. So it's kind of this tumbleweed that just keeps going,
Yeah. And the worst of it is the 3-letter agencies are the ones that's behind a lot of it.
90% of it. So.
Yeah.
And you think about the gold, that I think that's what the American government was more concerned about at that time, especially with all the dredges that were operating up there at that time. I believe that it wasn't until like the mid 60s that they really stopped the dredges, and it just went back to regular miners, with buckets and trommels and all that other stuff. So
yeah, it's funny how the gold situation worked in Alaska too, because as soon as they found out they had oil, it seemed like it wasn't too long after that they started drilling for oil, and then the gold thing just kind of went away.
Maybe we should start talking about Hart. Mooseman will show up. Yeah, I miss him too. It's if anybody's heard about him or has talked to him, please let us know. Zach, you need to turn your volume up, brother. We can't hear you.
I think it's ridiculous because we have soldiers who are trained and ready for combat. And I like how today's society is blinded by the media. I'm sorry, but the Ukraine situation isn't as bad as the media is portraying.
Absolutely. I agree 100%.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
I think it's totally different. I think it's a totally different kind of battle. Everything will come out in the wash. Everything will come out in the wash.
I love the pun. The wash. Ukraine. Money laundering. Speaking of Ukraine, did you notice that Joe Tato sent another billion to Ukraine, and miraculously today the stock market is up 300 points.
I know a bunch of Americans that could use that.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's true, Tom.
Government.
That's the way he works. Go ahead. Sorry, Zach.
See, the government uses us as little bitty pawns, and it's disgusting.
Yeah. And the thing is that's not the way it was. This government was set up to be. It's really not. Everybody say harp or moose too many times, you might just pop up. So Mayor says moose, moose, moose. Yep, Tom, that is correct. Down 1,900 over the last 4 days and up 300 today. Biden would say that's a record gain. I'm sorry, but in my lifetime, from 1966 until today, the greatest gains that we have ever seen in regards to the stock market or the Dow has been from 2017 until 2020. Hello.
Hello.
Next up, Operation Northwoods.
Hi everyone, it's Lee here for the 9/11 Blacklist and Chasing Shadows. Welcome to episode 33. Do you know what? I'm going back in time. It's episode 53 of Chasing Shadows, and we've got an awesome episode lined up for you today. This episode is about Operation Northwoods. We're going to be talking about it in great detail. And I'm going to be explaining to you why I feel that Operation Northwoods is possibly the best ever declassified document that you've ever seen and ever read. It is one of the most important documents that you must read. If you are in any kind of research kind of vein, if you love doing this kind of thing, you must read this document. Do not just look into, say, 9/11 and just look at the video evidence or other anecdotal evidence. If you want to research it and research it properly, you look at this document, and you don't just look at it and scan read it. You read it from the first line to the last. It is a declassified, top secret military document, and it is all about false flag events. I will be giving you a bit of history. I'll be taking you down that rabbit hole that I keep on talking about and seeing if you can possibly get where I'm actually coming from. You know, I think it's really important to take this on board. I think, well, really important, especially in with today's terror attacks going on. It is really important to know what your government, what any government is capable of. And the US government actually they made these false flag events, and they were of historical precedence. And if the US can do it, if the US military can do it, any military government can do it in the world. And trust me, it is not fake. It's not like what people call fake news or anything like that. This is historic reality. This is what was actually on the books to actually happen. It didn't actually happen. This is another historical kind of thing. It didn't actually happen in the end. But this document shows what they were planning for an invasion of Cuba, a serious false flag event, which they were going to go for it. They were going to deliberately put themselves in harm's way. I think this is the thing about false flag events. What are they? What are they, and what? Well, we're going to be discussing that. We're going to be discussing what false flag events are and how they impact their own countrymen, and why the US military, in this case of Operation Northwoods, actually did it in the first place. In July 1961, Democratic Senator William Fulbright of Arkansas, noting the activities of General Edwin Walker, called for an investigation of the Institute for American Strategy, the Richardson Foundation, the National War College, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all for subversive activity. Fulbright compared the mentality of some US military men to that of the OAS, the secret army organization, which plotted against General de Gaulle and was implicated in various assassination plots against him. All in all, there were 30 attempts to kill the French president. Fulbright's warnings were more accurate than he knew at the time. The crucial exhibit in this regard is Operation Northwoods, a plan to provoke a war with Cuba, which was supported by the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff and their chairman, General Lyman Lemnitzer. This document, titled Justification for US Military Intervention in Cuba, was provided by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara on March the 13th, 1962, as the key component of Northwoods. Written in response to a request from the Chief of Cuba Project, General Edward Lansdale, the top secret memorandum describes U.S. plans to covertly engineer various pretexts that would justify a U.S. invasion of Cuba. The documents of Operation Northwoods were first published in Australia by John Elliston in his Psy War on Cuba, the declassified history of U.S. anti-Castro propaganda in 1999. They became prominent around the time of 9/11, thanks to the study of Body of Secrets by James Bamford, former ABC newsman. ▲ had worked with Allen Dulles during World War II and was part of Dulles' Operation Sunrise, the separate surrender of the German forces in Italy by the SS General Karl Wolff. ▲ had helped to assemble the first stay-behind networks of the Gladio type, which were often staffed by former Nazi and fascists. ▲ along with Curtis LeMay of the Air Force, favored using the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962 to provoke general nuclear war with the USSR. Robert Dallek's new biography of Kennedy documents the reckless and irresponsible advice ▲ gave Kennedy on a number of military problems. He usually came down to recommending nuclear weapons under all circumstances as the only way to guarantee victory. In 1962, ▲ was denied his ambition of being reappointed to a second term as Joint Chiefs Chairman, but he was given the post of NATO Supreme Commander, where he presided over the creation of the first Gladio arms and explosives caches on the Italian front. ▲ did not retire from active duty until ┬ᖥ. President General Ford asked ▲ to join the agitation of the Committee on the Present Danger, a retread of the CIA front group from the early 1950s. CPD was the private sector arm of the CIA. Director George Bush's Team B, an exercise in anti-Soviet alarmism that foreshadowed the ▲ᖃ▍ Office of Special Plans in the Pentagon. Ford also promoted General William H. Craig, who had been part of the Northwood cabal, to be the head of the Army Security Agency, an arm of the super secret National Security Agency. The Center of the Electronic Surveillance. ▲ died in November 1988. Senator Albert Gore, Sr., the father of the later vice president, thought that ▲ was a part of the subversive machinations associated with General Edward Walker, who distributed inflammatory anti-Kennedy propaganda to his troops in Germany. When Walker returned to the US, he organized a racist plot against the hiring of the black professor at the University of Mississippi, and was prosecuted by Attorney General Robert Kennedy for sedition, insurrection, and rebellion. Walker was thought to have joined with French OAS military in plotting to kill de Gaulle. These same circles are also suspect in the Kennedy assassination. A little later, in 1963 and 64, George H. Bush ran for the Senate in Texas on a platform that included the overthrow of Castro and use of tactical nuclear weapons against North Vietnam. General Edward Lansdale was one of the most prominent practitioners of special forces, special operations, and related utopian military methods during the Cold War. He was one of the leading architects of the catastrophic US involvement in Vietnam. Lansdale was the founder of the US Special Warfare School as Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Lansdale worked closely together with Allen Dulles the Wall Street lawyer who became the head of the CIA during the Eisenhower administration, and who cooked up the plan for the Bay of Pigs and foisted it off on the newly inaugurated President Kennedy. When the Bay of Pigs failed, Kennedy wisely decided to cut his losses by not throwing more military assets into what was already a hopeless debacle. The Allen Dulles clique and many counterinsurgency orientated military officers blamed not their own incompetent planning, but Kennedy. In February '62, Robert Kennedy told Lansdale that his covert Operation Mongoose, a plot to kill Castro, should be frozen, and the emphasis shifted to gathering intelligence.
Slow Country, what's your thoughts so far?
Well, it definitely explains a lot, especially since the new JFK documents have been released, in December. So, I knew Bush had something to do with JFK. I knew that already, but the documents confirmed it because there was intelligence about it. And it's interesting that they're bringing up Vietnam too, because my dad always told me one of the reasons Kennedy was assassinated was because he wanted no involvement with Vietnam. Zero. But that didn't help the military industrial complex that, was George H.W. Bush had a big hand in.
So everything is connected within our government, and it's very mind-blowing to me.
Yeah. I mean, everything's connected. And it all leads back to the same sources. What are your thoughts?
Our three-letter agencies need destroyed.
Yeah, I could go along with that too.
The Dulles-Lemnitzer-Lansdale network should not be thought of as an extinct feature of the past, but rather as a living presence in the Pentagon, CIA, NSA, and other agencies. Given the track record of the network, they must necessarily come under the scrutiny in the context of 9/11. The Northwoods documents start from the premise that the US should be seeking war with Cuba over the short term for the purpose of regime change. The Joint Chiefs of Staff recommend that a national policy of early military intervention in Cuba be adopted by the United States. They also recommend that such intervention be undertaken as soon as possible, and preferably before the release of the National Guard and Reserve forces presently on active duty. Part of the effort would be to demonize Castro and his communist government. The Northwoods planners thought that the world opinion and the United States forum should be favorably affected by developing the international image of the Cuban government as rash and irresponsible, and as alarming and unpredictable threat in the peace of the Western Hemisphere. How could Castro be demonized? Northwoods. Exploding a few plastic bombs in carefully chosen spots, the arrest of Cuban agents, and the release of prepared documents substantiating Cuban involvement also will be helpful in projecting the idea of irresponsible government. In addition, hijacking attempts against civil air and surface craft could appear to continue as harassing measures condoned by the government of Cuba. Northwoods planners did not hesitate to prescribe attacks on U.S. ships, planes, or installations. We could blow up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blame Cuba, they wrote. Casualty lists in U.S. newspapers could cause a helpful wave of national indignation. Northwoods had not forgotten the main incident of 1898, nor did they hesitate to propose a murderous campaign of terror against U.S. civilians. We could develop a communist Cuban terror campaign in the Miami area, in other Florida cities, and even in Washington, proposed the Joint Chiefs planners. The terror campaign could be pointed at Cuban refugees seeking haven in the United States. So much for the notions that rogue Pentagon and CIA elements have any profound metaphysical inhibitions about killing their own troops or US citizens in general. This is an important lesson to bring to the analysis of 9/11. In the search for a pretext, the Joint Chiefs of Staff planners also considered a massacre of foreign citizens. We could also sink a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, real or simulated. We could foster attempts on lives on Cuban refugees in the United States, even to the extent of wounding instances to be widely publicized. The most complicated project proposed by the Northwoods brainstormers. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you've heard, the history behind Operation Northwoods is absolutely spot on with how it could easily be interpreted as an adaptation for 9/11. It's there, the template is there. But I'm just going to read a portion of the pretexts. You've seen it on the screen. I've scrolled it up through the screen, and it probably still is going on right now, just to show you that this document is profound. It really, really is. This portion of the pretext to justify US military intervention in Cuba, as you can see, was top secret, but now has been declassified and is all there for everybody to see. Now, what I'm going to read for you is absolutely eye-popping. It really is. And if you haven't seen this already and you know anything about 9/11, it's a must read. I like I keep on saying, I emphasize this is a must read, and if you haven't read it yet, it's so important. It actually states, what I'm reading, it actually states it is possible to create an incident which will demonstrate convincingly that a Cuban aircraft has attacked and shot down a chartered civilian airliner en route from the United States to Jamaica, Guatemala, Panama, and Venezuela. The destination would be chosen only to cause the flight plan route to cross Cuba. Passengers could be a group of college students off on a holiday, or any grouping of persons with a common interest chartering a non-scheduled flight. An aircraft at Elgin Air Force Base could be painted and numbered as an exact duplicate for a civil registered aircraft belonging to a CIA proprietary organization in the Miami area. At a designated time, the duplicate would be substituted for the actual civil aircraft and would be loaded with the selected passengers, all boarded under carefully prepared aliases. The actual
So duplicate planes sound suspicious.
Oh yeah, we've heard that before. We've heard that before. And then mysterious lessons that just happen to take place in Florida also. Yeah.
Aircraft will be converted to a drone. Ladies and gentlemen, in previous episodes of Chasing Shadows, I have put this forth to you. This is taken directly from a declassified document called Operation Northwoods. I am not making any of this up, and I have put the actual document on screen in front of you. 1962, ladies and gentlemen, this was actually put forth in 1962. What happened on 9/11? Check out what happened on 9/11. Look at the flight routes. All you have to do is see them converge. All of them. You know, Flight 11, UA-175, Flight 93, and Flight 77. They all take very strange flight routes, converge at really strange places. You can tell me, you can't tell me, ladies and gentlemen, that my theory about Stewart Air National Guard isn't a plausible one. It states it practically right here in this top secret document, which was declassified back in 1962. I just can't get over that. It's just mind blowing. I'd love to know what your thoughts and opinions are on this. It is incredible stuff, and I know a lot of you out there know this already, but I want to hear your opinions on this. And you've seen my videos, you've seen what I put forth, but I still want your opinions. Below the video description, please do put all your thoughts and opinions on Operation Northwoods, and indeed what I'm reading out for you and what I've shown you on the screen today. It says takeoff time of the drone aircraft and the second actual aircraft will be scheduled to allow a rendezvous south of Florida. From the rendezvous point, the passenger carrying aircraft will descend to a minimum altitude and go directly into the auxiliary field at ᖴᖇᘿᘿᷗᓍᘻ Air Force Base, where arrangements will have been made to evacuate the passengers and return the aircraft to the original status. The drone aircraft, meanwhile, will continue to fly the filed flight plan. When over Cuba, the drone will begin transmitting the international distress frequency Mayday message, the Mayday message stating they are under attack by Cuban MiGs. The transmission will be interrupted by destruction of the aircraft, which will be triggered by radio signal. And the document continues on. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, this, as we have seen, this was pretty much the precise template for the remote control and plane switching theory that is able to explain so many discrepant facts about 9/11, down to the final detail of feigned cluelessness. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has just proved that the US military will pretty much go to any lengths to provoke an attack and to make war. War, as I've shown in one of my previous videos from JFK, as Donald Sutherland was actually the character of X. He was basically describing to Kevin Costner's character of Jim Garrison that war is the biggest business in the world. And you know what? This shows that the US government, in the shadow kind of areas, they will deliberately go out their way to, you know, it wasn't even in the shadow government. You know, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Lyman and Lemnitzer, gave the go-ahead to this. He actually was the top dog, and he actually said, you know what, as a pretext for an invasion of Cuba, you know, I'm pretty much up for anything. And when you actually look at this document, you can see that when I say that, I mean that they were pretty much up to anything. They would even put their own US citizens in harm's way deliberately to turn around and say, guess what? Cuba are doing this. Let's have war with Cuba.
So our government really don't care about the people, unlike the Constitution says.
Yeah, it's funny that you should mention that. I got a link to send you, brother. I'll send it in private chat. I went over it last night in my show.
And they would use it as an excuse. That's all it was. That's all it was. But they would go to extraordinary lengths to use these crazy examples to actually to turn around and say, right, it was essentially used as an excuse to invade another country and start a war. And that is it. Why? I mean, that is essentially the pretext for Operation Northwoods. They were using anything in their power to create war, because war is the biggest business in the world. And crazy as it seems, that is exactly what they did. So 22nd of November 1963 came about, and President Kennedy was assassinated. He was assassinated because he wanted peace. He wanted to splinter the CIA and throw them to the wind. He wanted peace in our lifetime. And the military-industrial complex absolutely shivered. They didn't want that at all. And because they didn't want that at all, he was killed. And he wasn't killed by some rogue idiot called Lee Harvey Oswald. Because at the most, Lee Harvey Oswald was a low-level CIA operative. Because at the end of the day, he was molded. He was groomed, for want of a better expression, and used. And that is quite simply all he was used for. He was used to be the lone idiot who actually went up into that Texas School Book Depository and did the deed, and was then bumped off a couple of days later. But it was, did he do it? No, of course he didn't. And I think anybody who, to this day, actually turns around and says Lee Harvey Oswald was anything to do with that, it was crazy. But the thing is, the fact that they used him, and he was pretty much stool pigeon almost to actually do their dirty work. But why am I going on about this? The reason I'm going on about this is because, he was used for this purpose, but ultimately at the end of the day, JFK was assassinated by like-minded individuals in the US government, in the CIA, in the FBI, in the NSA, and the ONI. All those people, all these people in the like-minded individuals in those places, as soon as JFK was saying, right, I want peace, they wanted war. Why did they want war? Because it's the biggest business in the world.
See, that's why I'm covering certain topics on Wednesdays. Weeks ago I covered JFK and 9/11.
Yeah, the corruption goes so far. If you remember, for anybody that's old enough, at the time, George Bush Sr. was actually the head of the CIA at the time. And then he was also friends with old man Satoru, which is the daddy for Barack Obama. So, which also Satoru worked for one of the military, or not military, it was kind of like kind of like Blackwater. So it wasn't Blackwater, it was a group like Blackwater. So, I mean, we got to connect the dots.
It's and Operation Northwoods was the biggest, one of the biggest portions of this. They wanted war. They wanted war. One, because it was great to blame another country for something that they hadn't even done, as an excuse to go to war. But it's the biggest business. It's and crazy as it sounds, that's the way the U.S. Department, the U.S. military, all thought. And this is all revealed in Operation Northwoods in this secret document. But the thing is, Operation Northwoods was never actually carried out in regards to Cuba. However, this does not mean that these concepts were never implemented at all. The Gulf of Tonkin incident of August 1964, the two US destroyers were operating along the coast of North Vietnam, very near South Vietnamese ships, which were raiding and bombarding the north. The Pentagon then announced that the two destroyers, the Maddox and the Turner Joy, had been attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. President Johnson then ordered US airstrikes on nearby North Vietnamese ports and naval bases, and also used this incident to extort the infamous Gulf of Tonkin resolution from Congress, which gave him unlimited power to wage war. Later, it turned out that there had not been any North Vietnamese torpedo boats, but more likely only ghost images on the radar screens of the destroyers. Here again, we have a parallel to the war games and fake radar blips experienced by FAA flight controllers on 9/11. After the Gulf of Tonkin incident, Johnson was clearly embarked on the path of escalating the Vietnam War with disastrous consequences for all concerned. So, ladies and gentlemen, Operation Northwoods is possibly the most important declassified document you will ever need to read, because it sets the precedence of waging war on Cuba. But more importantly, in relation to 9/11, everything is set out there as if it's a template to actually turn around and say, look, there's the template for 9/11. Let's go ahead and do it. If everybody who was, the neoconservatives, if they're organizing, get George Bush into power, let him be president, and organize everything for him to work out perfectly for him, well, this was a perfect template for it. Let's just use this template, Operation Northwoods. We were going to put this into play back in 1962. Let's use this now. And you look at how 9/11 played out, the events of September 11th, 2001, how they actually played out, and tell me that is not a coincidence. It happened that way because they wanted it to happen that way. Guys, it has been an absolute pleasure to do another great episode of Chasing Shadows from the 9/11 Blacklist. I'd love to hear your comments, love to hear your thoughts on this. This is a seriously
It's really aggravating that our government is okay with this.
Oh, yeah. And Annalisa, what you're talking about with the picture of a young Obama in a yard with Mama Bush. So Did you guys ever hear the story of the behind the piece of candy that George W. Bush gave Obama at the funeral? When Obama was a little boy, his dad pretty much took him under, George H.W. Bush took Obama under his wing, and every time he would see him, he would give him a piece of candy. So at the funeral, it was symbolic for George W. Bush to hand Barack Obama a piece of hard candy out of his pocket. That was the story behind it. And they were really close. As a matter of fact, I think George H.W. Bush sponsored the Obama's education.
And then I feel like the Bushes are connected to the Clintons.
Oh, they are. And the Clintons are connected to everybody, it seems like, including Tyson Meats. Yeah. It's nuts. It really is. It's really nuts.
I have another video of Northwoods.
Awesome.
The year is 1962, and the United States is embroiled in a global struggle for power known as the Cold War. On one side stands the US and its democratic allies, and on the other, the Soviet Union and its expanding network of communist states. Cuba has recently fallen to communism, replacing the military dictatorship there that was propped up by the United States. And acting more in its own interest rather than in an interest to promote democracy, the US has decided that this cannot stand. A communist ally of the Soviet Union simply cannot be allowed to remain so close to US shores, especially with the possibility of opening up military bases for use by Soviet forces, placing them less than 100 miles from the Florida coast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Infographic Show. Today we're taking a look at a very desperate and terrifying proposal to overthrow the Cuban government with Operation Northwoods, secret US false flag operations against Americans. The strategic picture is grim for the US. A communist Cuba with close ties to the Soviet Union could serve as a staging area for Soviet forces in preparation for an attack into the United States. This is a position the US has not been in since the War of 1812. And after the burning of the American capital at the hands of the British, the US military has vowed that no enemy shall ever set foot on American soil again. Yet now there's the potential for hostile Soviet forces to be based just a few dozen miles from Miami. And Soviet Navy and Air Force bases in Cuba could not only threaten targets in the US, but also cripple the US economically. By blockading the Gulf of Mexico, a Soviet invasion force could board its ships and in a matter of hours be making landfall in Miami. or used the strategically important shipping port of Mobile, Alabama, to unload thousands of troops virtually unopposed, requiring at least 24 hours to marshal a response force. Such an invasion could be pulled off before the majority of U.S. naval forces could respond, leaving several key port facilities in Soviet hands and making the offloading of even more troops easier. There are, of course, even greater concerns from Soviet nuclear forces. Right now, with the aid of a picket line of powerful radar installations across the Arctic Circle, the U.S. and its allies can detect and respond to a Soviet nuclear launch or incursion by nuclear bombs with plenty of time to get its own nuclear forces in the air. Any Soviet forces located in Cuba, though, could strike deep into U.S. territory well before America can respond, and its fighters would have practically no chance to stop Russian nuclear bombs striking into Florida, Alabama, Georgia, or Louisiana. Then there's the fear of Soviet ballistic nuclear missiles, which could be launched and strike their targets in a matter of minutes, potentially knocking out the U.S.'s ability to respond and leaving America completely vulnerable to a total defeat of World War III. For the United States, it's clear a communist Cuba cannot be tolerated, and almost as soon as Castro takes power, plans begin to depose him. In 1962, the United States launches Operation Mongoose, which will become one of the most ambitious and flat-out crazy intelligence operations in all history. Mongoose will pull together all the various arms of the U.S. intelligence services in a bid to figure out ways to either replace Castro, outright kill him, or at the very least diminish his influence. Nothing is too crazy to try. From exploding seashells placed by Navy divers at his favorite beaches to the training of one of his ex-lovers to murder him mid-coitus, there's no avenue too out of the box to explore. The CIA even considers exposing the leader to high levels of estrogen and chemicals that'll make his hair fall out, all in the hopes that Castro's rugged, manly persona could be turned into a whiny, overly hysterical, emotional wreck with breasts. That's right, the CIA tried to defeat Castro by giving him breasts. You heard that correctly, and you heard it here on the Infographics Show. Yet, while CIA spooks were coming up with all sorts of crazy and zany ideas to either kill or humiliate Castro on the international stage, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, supreme commanders of the various branches of the U.S. Armed Forces, had a much more straightforward idea. They say that to a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and the U.S. military is very much a hammer, and Castro was very much a particularly troublesome nail. At first, they floated the idea of simply bombing Castro, not secretly, the way the CIA planned to do in a bid to avoid international outrage, but much more overtly with a strike by military aircraft. Short, sweet, and very much to the point. Within seconds, Castro would be less a bothersome nail that needed hammering and more a floating cloud of ashes. When the Joint Chiefs were reminded that this was not the way the U.S. did things, they realized that if they wanted the Castro dead, and they definitely did, then they would need an excuse to do so. Thus, the Hammers decided to get sneaky and came up with one of the most morally abhorrent plans to remove Castro from power in U.S. history, with the CIA elbows deep in Operation Mongoose, the official codename for the removal of Castro. The Joint Chiefs decided that the best way to kill or remove Castro would be through military force. Yet an unmerited invasion of Cuba would have not just disastrous political consequences, but would never be supported by the American people themselves. The U.S. would need a reason to go to war against the tiny island nation, something that every American could get behind and support. Under the codename of Operation Northwoods, a series of plans to justify the invasion of Cuba were drawn up. Known as false flag operations, the Joint Chiefs drew up a series of plans to conduct hostile operations against its own military and civilians, and those of neighboring nations, while making it look as if the attacks were being carried out by Cuban operatives. To achieve their ultimate objective of a Cuban invasion, the Joint Chiefs made the following proposals, all to be carried out by clandestine American agents. Number 1, attacking Guantanamo Bay Naval Station, either with teams of fake commandos who would then be captured, or by lobbing mortar shells into the installation from outside of its boundaries. Aircraft could be purposefully set on fire and sabotaged by individuals inside the base, and a ship, either a real Navy ship with actual sailors aboard or a drone ship, could be blown up in Guantanamo Bay itself, with the blame falling on Cuban military forces. This would be purposefully reminiscent of the Remember the Maine incident in 1898, where a U.S. battleship was sunk in Havana Harbor, with the death of 260 American soldiers. The incident helped spur the American public to support a war against Spain, and secure Cuban semi-independence. Number 2, the Pentagon would foster a homegrown terror campaign in Washington and possibly other cities, all perpetuate fake Cuban operatives and blamed on Cuban refugees seeking haven in the United States. This would include the gunning down of American civilians on the street, planting of bombs in public places, all with the intent of whipping up the American public into a frenzy against Cuban refugees and thus Cuba. Number 3, perhaps because even the Joint Chiefs thought at the time that murdering American civilians might be too cold-blooded, they also suggested that instead of terror attacks against American citizens, they could series of fake terror attacks against Cuban refugees, or sink boats which they point out could be real or simulated full of refugees. The purpose of this campaign would be to foster a sense of pity for refugees from Americans, who would support a war against the evil Fidel Castro and his Cuban government. Number 4, supporting Cuban efforts to subvert governments of Haiti, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. The U.S. was fully aware that Castro was secretly funneling aid to guerrilla movements in those nations in the hopes of expanding communism across the Caribbean. The Joint Chiefs actually helping those plans along and exposing them so as to draw international consternation against Cuba and justify an invasion in the name of keeping the peace. The plan listed as an example raids by the U.S. Air Force flying Cuban B-26 or C-46 aircraft into the Dominican Republic, where they could launch attacks against sugarcane fields, even using Soviet incendiary munitions. These attacks would be supplemented by fake messages from Cuba to the communist underground present in the Dominican Republic, and even shipments of weapons and explosives which could be conveniently intercepted on the beaches. Number 5, MiG-type aircraft flown by U.S. pilots could be used to harass civilian airliners or attack surface shipping vessels. Military drone aircraft could be targeted and destroyed by these fake MiGs in order to add to the credibility of the Cuban threat. The plan acknowledges the difficulty in procuring a real MiG, but notes that a credible copy could be developed in just about 3 months. Number 6, hijacking attempts against air and naval craft by fake Cuban operatives, which were of course designed to fail or succeed only temporarily. Number 7, the shooting down of a chartered civilian aircraft, which would be secretly a repainted U.S. Air Force plane. The aircraft would be remotely piloted, and in the press, the American people could be told that it was full of U.S. college students off on a trip to South America. These aircraft and real aircraft, which would be boarded by fake passengers. The drone aircraft would rendezvous a real aircraft in a determined location on the Florida coast, and the drone aircraft would then continue flying the flight path filled with civilian aviation agencies. The real aircraft would immediately dive to minimum altitude and fly back to an auxiliary airfield in Eglin Air Force Base, with the fake passengers offloaded. Once flying over Cuba, the drone would transmit a mayday with a pre-recorded message saying that it was under attack by Cuban MiGs, and then the drone would be remote detonated via radio. This would allow civilian radio installations around the Western Hemisphere to tell the U.S. what had happened, rather than the U.S. itself trying to convince people of what happened. Number 8. While just 15 to 20 miles off the Cuban coast, a U.S. Air Force fighter jet would radio a distress call, saying he was being attacked by Cuban MiGs. The jet would then dive to a minimum altitude and fly back to an auxiliary airfield in Eglin Air Force Base, where the jet's tail number would be changed and the pilot flying under an alias would resume his real identity and rejoin his real squadron. Then a U.S. submarine would secretly disperse jet parts in a parachute off the waters of Cuba, as if to make it seem like a U.S. Air Force jet had really been shot down. The Joint Chiefs quickly took their proposal straight to President John F. Kennedy, who read through the briefing document and immediately denied it. Appalled at the lengths to which the Joint Chiefs were willing to go to justify an invasion of Cuba, President Kennedy would go on to fire General Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Though Operation Northwoods would have indisputably achieved its objectives of giving the U.S. a pretense to go to war against Cuba, President Kennedy could not stomach the sheer horror of some of what the Joint Chiefs seemed ready to do in order to get their invasion. Kennedy's strong and immediate reaction to Operation Northwoods would go on to make the Joint Chiefs believe that he was soft on Cuba and create a rift between himself and the military, which would last until the Cuban Missile Crisis. Thankfully, once again, President Kennedy would stand up to the Joint Chiefs during the crisis and reject the use of force, potentially saving the world from World War III. In the end, Operation Northwoods was an immoral and un-American proposal to justify a needless war, and proof of why civilian leadership of the military is vital for the health and well-being of any democracy. Do you think Operation Northwoods would have actually worked? Also, make sure you check out our other video, Breaking the Iranian Embassy Siege, Operation Nimrod.
So that's basically why JFK was assassinated, in my opinion.
Yep. That's one of the big reasons, because he didn't want to go to war if we didn't have to. It would be a strain on the people. It would be a strain on the economy. It would be, he wanted peace.
Human causalities, unfortunately.
Yeah. There's casualties in any war, but the thing is, with a false flag like that, there would have been severe civilian casualties, because they would have retaliated. They would have struck the U.S. down in Florida, Alabama, the southern coast of Georgia, right there, just off the panhandle, or not the panhandle, the part of Florida that's connected to Alabama and Georgia. And it would have caused a lot of human loss right there, American loss, people that didn't even know what was going on. So, yeah, it would have worked. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And this one ties into both of them, Northwoods and Washtub.
at the roots of international terrorism, now on BBC Two. In the first of 3 programs, Time Watch traces the often brutal work and political influence of the Gladio network of secret agents.
Bonjour, un soir, cette personne est venue chez moi et m'a demandé si je voulais me charger de missions confidentielles. Il a expliqué que c'était quelque chose qui était dans le cadre de l'OTAN, mais sans beaucoup plus d'explications, parce que à ce moment-là, j'étais toujours susceptible de refuser, donc il ne s'indiquait pas de donner trop de détails, puisque toute cette organisation était absolument secrète. C'était une des organisations les plus secrètes qui ait jamais existé. Nous avions une radio à notre disposition et la base était effectivement située dans les environs de Londres et une deuxième base se trouvait du côté de Boston.
Ho fatto esercitazioni con reparti speciali americani, inglesi, francesi, belgi. Normalmente le esercitazioni consistevano nel lancio di questi specialisti da aerei che venivano direttamente dalla Francia, dal Belgio, dall'Inghilterra, venivano paracadutati e c'erano i nostri, cioè quelli che avevamo addestrati, che li facevano le dovute segnalazioni a terra e poi li guidavano nelle case sicure.
Gladio, così come è stata definita, individuata, descritta oggi, è una componente di quelle che ho sempre chiamato strutture parallele. C'è un esercito invisibile, non predisposto per una battaglia, una guerra esterna contro un ipotetico invasore, ma addestrato ad operare all'interno contro quello che in tutti gli ambienti militari è stato sempre definito una quinta colonna dell'Unione Sovietica, il Partito Comunista e le forze di estrema sinistra ad esso collegate.
For 40 years, secret terrorist organizations, many trained by Western intelligence agencies, have manipulated the political control of European sovereign states by a campaign of terror and murder. Originally part of a secret network, these groups changed from being defenders of state security into attackers of the established political order. Until 2 years ago, that secret network was generally known by the single word Gladio. On November the 9th, 1990, the Prime Minister of Italy, Giulio Andreotti, revealed to his own parliament and the world the existence of a top-secret European-wide network of secret agents. It was called Gladio. This network of stay-behind groups was intended to fight a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. Andreotti's announcement led to an immediate reaction in the capitals of Europe. The suspicion was that some parts of the Gladio structures were involved in internal subversion.
Nous avons été saisis de la question du stay behind belge, on l'a appelé la question Gladio, par le scandale qui a été déclenché en Italie par la révélation de l'existence en Italie d'un réseau stay behind. Et notre ministre de la Défense nationale a été interpellé par son collègue italien qui voulait savoir quelles avaient été les décisions prises lors de la dernière réunion des State Behind européens.
C'était un soir de novembre 1990, quand un délégué des autorités italiennes est venu me demander si je savais ce qu'était Gladio. À vrai dire, je n'en savais rien, sauf que ce jour-là, dans un journal italien, sur le trajet entre le Caire et Bruxelles, je venais de voir qu'il y avait un scandale en Italie, appelé Gladio.
Le ministre a fait savoir, que c'est une chose étonnante, qu'il n'était pas au courant de l'existence au sein de l'armée et au sein de la sûreté de l'État d'un réseau State Behind. Gladio è stata sempre protetta. L'esempio più illustre, quando Moro fu chiamato, Moro, che poi era Moro, che fu chiamato a testimoniare il processo di Catanzaro, gli domandarono se lui aveva conoscenza di una struttura segreta parallela dentro i servizi, e Moro domandò ai servizi che tipo di risposta doveva dare. I servizi gli dissero che non esisteva niente, e Moro disse: sono informato che non esiste niente.
Partie des autorités existent toujours su que cette structure existait. Il y avait des parlementaires qui étaient dans un conseil secret qui faisait de sorte de contrôle, mais un contrôle qui ne pouvait pas être effectif parce que nous avons trouvé que ces parlementaires ne savaient pratiquement rien.
Queste strutture parallele hanno impiegato elementi dell'estrema destra per un motivo molto semplice. È in corso una battaglia anticomunista. Nel 1945 è finita la seconda guerra mondiale ed è iniziata la terza guerra mondiale.
The autumn of 1944. Benito Mussolini would be dead in 6 months. Adolf Hitler in less than a year.
della Repubblica Sociale Italiana è il simbolo della nostra fede assoluta.
As the Allied armies advanced on the capitals of Axis-occupied Europe, the other war, the secret war of agents and partisan groups that had always been part of the bigger war, was to reach its own climax.
Alla mattina, appena alzata, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao alla mattina, appena alzata, l'Italia mi tocca assai. E tra gli insetti e le zanzare, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, 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 e tra gli insetti e le zanzare, duro lavoro mi tocca fare.
As the Germans withdrew, they left secret agents in the countries they occupied. The secret services called such groups stay-behinds. For the retreating Germans, they were the staunchest believers. They were selected from the SS and the fascist Black Legions. They were to become the foot soldiers of the next war about to begin, the Cold War.
Le Palais des Sports de Bruxelles a été le théâtre d'une manifestation monstre consacrée au thème « Réunion de tous les peuples européens dans la lutte contre le bolchevisme ».
Nous avions vu là-bas dans les plaines de Russie les Italiens et les Croates, les Hongrois, les Norvégiens, les Danois, les Hollandais, nos frères flamands. Nous nous retrouvions tous là-bas, longtemps déjà, cette force énorme qui ne soulevait toutes parts. Quoi? Parce qu'ils ont eu cet illuminaton de la vérité. Allons avec moi au combat.
Ahead of the advancing Allies, always with the first troops, was the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, and that part of the OSS charged with locating enemy spare arms had been given the designation X2.
I came in and sent by General Donovan and got in touch with the heads of the Committee of National, the military junta of the Committee of National Groups, which is the joint partisan groups. Andy Birding was the first X2 guy who came into Rome. And he'd been an old AP correspondent, and I thought I could trust him, that he was a good guy. And so we turned over to him everything we had on the German stay-behinds. Then Jim Angleton appeared in August. He began recruiting fascists because he figured that the best way to control the communists was to hire fascists. One of the most tough ones was Prince Valerio Borghese, who ran what was known as the 10th Flotilla. These are the guys that would execute partisans and hang them from lampposts all over Italy.
Oh, bella ciao, 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 mamma mia. Oh, che tormento, io ti ogni domani.
Angleton made a deal with Borghese and then rushed up to save this commander from the partisans who would have lynched him any time, because he had lynched thousands of partisans.
Does this sound like Antifa today, but the opposite?
Yeah.
C made another connection without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
Di un personaggio che ci porta diritti nel cuore del servizio segreto americano. Lui venne salvato da Angleton, venne protetto da Angleton nel 1945, quando si è reso a Milano alla fine della seconda guerra mondiale. La 10ª MAS, quindi Valerio Borghese, la 10ª MAS alla formazione che lui comandava, sottoscrisse l'impegno scritto di prendere le armi con gli alleati nel caso di conflitto con l'Unione Sovietica.
Licio Gelli, later to head the secret T2 Masonic Lodge, had been a liaison officer attached to the SS. He had his own encounter with X2 agents.
Quando sono arrivati ci hanno fatto prigioniero un gruppo di canadesi che poi ci hanno portato giù e quindi erano della OSS. Siamo stati. Io sono stato lì da loro, trattato bene, mi hanno tenuto una settimana ad un appartamento a Pistoia portandomi una risma di carta e mi disse appunto all'ufficiale che dovevo scrivere tutta la mia vita dal momento che alla oggi quello che avevo fatto. Dopo un'altra settimana vennero a chiedermi se volevo essere paracadutato al nord. Era un colonnello americano al quale risposi di no, che non desideravo essere paracadutato perché io avevo già terminato il mio compito.
To show what a cynical game it is, this young policeman Federico Umberto D'Amato, the night that the Allies came in to Rome, rounded up all the German stay-behinds whose addresses he had, put them in jail, turned them over to the Americans, and they were disposed of.
The German stay-behinds were turned over to Italian authorities and sentenced by Italian military courts.
A un certo momento io facevo servizio all'albergo Excelsior dove c'era il generale Meltzer, che era il capo delle forze armate tedesche a Roma, e lì c'era anche questa centrale dell'Abwehrluft. E un giorno riuscii a introdurmi in una di queste stanze e con un certo rischio, devo dire, mi impossessai di queste liste. E quando andarono via i tedeschi, io pensai che non avevano nessuna di queste persone, invece c'erano tutti, perché era un'operazione di lasciare le persone sul posto mano a mano che si ritiravano, per cui non avevano bisogno di farli passare le linee. Qualche cosa come che si è detto, come lei sa come me, meglio di me, a proposito dell'operazione Gladio. E quando gli americani vennero qui e li cercarono e li trovarono che erano già arrestati. E da allora poi ebbe inizio questa collaborazione, sempre d'accordo con il mio governo e riferendo sempre alle mie autorità nazionali.
From that day of his joining Jim Angleton, or the X2 part of OSS, he ran the secret police for the next 40 years.
Molti funzionari di polizia erano stati costretti ad andare a nord al seguito di Mussolini e si trovavano in una triste condizione in quel momento. Siccome mio padre era funzionario di polizia, li conosceva tutti, e fu deciso dall'OSS X2 di paracadutarmi, a me che non ero mai visto un paracaduto in vita mia, di paracadutarmi nella zona di Salò, dove per fortuna riuscii ad arrivare e dove contattai i principali funzionari della Repubblica di Salò, che aderirono naturalmente a collaborare e che sono stati poi alcuni tra i più importanti dirigenti dello Stato italiano, del Ministero dell'Interno, nell'immediato dopoguerra.
Gladio was a joint brainchild, but its most intense architect was Angleton. And Angleton, as most people know, was a sort of a professional paranoiac. One of his favorite sayings used to be that even paranoiacs have enemies. And Angleton was a fellow who felt that you couldn't trust anybody, particularly not any foreign country.
Perché più passa il tempo, più si va avanti negli studi sulla questo sia per della seconda guerra mondiale e sia soprattutto nel periodo successivo della guerra fredda, più si vedrà che Angleton è stato un personaggio straordinario, intendiamoci, straordinario sotto tutti i punti di vista, anche, se mi permetti di dire, un po' nella follia, perché, come diceva Erasmo da Rotterdam, ci vuole un pizzico di in tutte le cose. E quando si arruolava all'OSS, che era il servizio da cui è nato la CIA dopo, c'era un cartello con scritto: per entrare a far parte dell'OSS non è necessario essere pazzi, ma è molto utile. E credo che l'avesse proprio fatto scrivere Angleton.
We sort of anticipated another world war, and a world war that would be characterized by occupation of Western Europe by Soviet forces. And therefore, we were preparing to set up the base for a resistance movement which could exist during war.
The Soviet Union was viewed as our primary antagonist, our enemy, and I think that was true. The Stalinist period was a really vicious period in the Soviet Union, and we thought in the late 40s and early 50s that Stalin might invade Western Europe.
it was the plan that I knew about, that the people who had a logical reason for being in a given area where we felt it was essential to have stay-behinds, and whose activities could continue even after an attack by the Warsaw Pact. He would be given additional training. He would know the location of some of the arms and communications caches, and that he would be able, as a result of his training, to recruit additional personnel to augment his network, and that it would include not only just communications, but it would include the ability to use explosives.
The stay-behind effort, in my view, was simply to be sure that if the worst came to worst, if a communist party came into power, that there would be some agents there who would tip us off and tell us what was happening, and be around to provide the information even after the coup might occur.
With the emergence of NATO in Western Europe, in specific response to the communist takeover in Czechoslovakia in 1948 and the Berlin blockade, directives were issued to establish Europe-wide stay-behind organizations along the lines which existed in the final years of World War II in Western Europe. There was an amendment to the NATO protocol, and that amendment was absolutely necessary. You didn't get in the door unless you signed. And what was in that amendment was the agreement of the government not to prosecute right-wing activists, right-wing activities, anti-communist activists in their own countries.
It's not unlikely that some right-wing groups were recruited and made to be stay-behinds because they would indeed have tipped us off if a war were going to begin. So using right-wingers, if you use them not politically but for intelligence purposes, is okay.
In 1948, I was a special agent with CIC, that's our counterintelligence corps in occupied Germany. I was stationed in Augsburg, and as such, since I spoke fluent German, I was assigned to handle a network of German informants. Among them was Klaus Barbie. And Klaus Barbie was later on, I discovered that he was wanted for murder by the French, and that I reported this to my superiors, and they told me to keep nice and quiet. He's still valuable. When he's no longer valuable, we turn him over to the French. I thought that I was going to get a promotion when I told them about Barbie, and they told me to keep quiet. Gunther Bernau was an agent, an informant working for the military intelligence in Stuttgart. We had provided him a home, a safe house in Ludwigsburg, and there I met him 3 times a week, and he brought us information about communists and whatever we wanted to hear, he told us. He was certainly a very strong Nazi. I sat in his office one day and opened his album of pictures from the war, and in the middle of the album, it showed a nice picture of Adolf Hitler. Several other high-ranking SS officers who came to visit him in his safe house that we had provided. And he told me that if for any reason he needs help, by one telephone call he could contact 200 former SS leaders from Hamburg to Munich. I remember him taking me to one particular spot which we uncovered and dug it out, and there were rifles, small arms, grenades, all nicely wrapped in cosmoline, and he said we have thousands of these all over the country. And that sort of made me a little suspicious, and I reported this, and they said, well, we know this. They're all working for us in case the communists come across the Iron Curtain. A former general, SS General Paul Hauser, was a frequent visitor at Bernau's house, and they worked together hand in glove about certain programs which we didn't know anything about, and I wasn't even asked to find out more about it. Somebody above me must have been running this network already at that time.
The man in Adnau's office, who also had, I guess, his fullest confidence, who oversaw Gladio in its earliest stages, was a fellow named Dr. гр đ, who was an ex-Nazi, who Adnau had brought into the government the way he brought a lot of ex-Nazis into the government, because I guess his position was that these were the only people who really had any administrative experience, and so they were, I guess, denazified, if you want to call it that. They were cleaned up a little bit like today Nazi, tomorrow Democrat, like changing undershirts.
What we were doing is either with the government secretly or independently on our own, looking for people who might perform this function in some country where you didn't have that connection with the government or whatever, or maybe you did as a supplement. But maybe one or two extra people that would have this training, stay there during the Soviet occupation and be the base that you could then talk about recruiting other people to join.
There was documentary material when Colby was station chief in Stockholm that he had been in touch with former Swedish volunteers in the Nordic legions of the SS, the Waffen-SS, and people who later came to be known, I guess, as ▴ that he was recruiting these people.
The first scandal connected to the stay-behind groups broke in 1952 with the discovery of assassination teams linked to the Bundesdeutsche Jugend.
In all those countries, some elements of the social democratic or socialist parties aligned themselves with the communists into so-called national unity parties or socialist unity parties. The presumption was that should the Soviet army make a move toward the West, they would try to build some kind of a German puppet government in the German territory which they would occupy. The Bundesdeutsche Jugend was a right-wing political organization loosely affiliated with one of the political parties in the state of Hesse in Germany. And it was deemed that these people have the motivation and the willingness to serve as part of the underground should the Soviet army indeed overrun all or part of West Germany. Now, as part of these preparations against that day, somebody's enthusiasm ran away with his judgment, and they drew up a list of German politicians, including many prominent social democrats, who they thought might be the kind of people that the Soviet army would look for in trying to organize a puppet government. When the story broke, there was a considerable flap, and it was deemed desirable that General Truscott should personally explain to the people involved what had happened. And we explained the situation first to Chancellor Konrad Adenauer of Germany. Then we explained it to General Matthew Ridgway, who was then the Commander-in-Chief of NATO. And finally, and most importantly, we explained it to Prime Minister George Sinn of Hesse, who himself was on that list. And Truscott explained to the Hessian Prime Minister that this was an unauthorized activity, to be sure only a paper exercise, but of which he was unaware, and it certainly shouldn't be interpreted as in any way casting aspersions on our confidence in Prime Minister Sinn. From the beginning, Gladio was really divided into two spheres of influence: British and American, because the original agreement between Sir Stuart Menzies and the ex-OSS people, Wisner and those, had foreseen that the British would retain their sphere of influence in the countries that were traditionally British, such as the Netherlands, Belgium, Portugal, Spain, and the United States had very little to do with those. We'd see, or rather I would see, documents having to do with that, but if anything needed to be done, I would have to contact somebody who had that responsibility in BI6.
Après la guerre, le ministre, le chef de l'Intelligence Service, Menzies, Monsieur Menzies a pris contact avec le ministre des Affaires étrangères de Belgique, Monsieur Spaak, très connu, M. Paul-Henri Spaak, et ils se sont entendus sur le principe de créer un réseau stabilisé belge en période de paix, afin justement de ne pas connaître tous les inconvénients et tous les dangers qui avaient été liés à la constitution eustébienne pendant la guerre.
La relation peut-être privilégiée au départ entre les services de renseignement britanniques et les services de renseignement belges trouve son origine naturelle dans les contacts qui ont eu lieu entre M. Spaak à l'époque et le patron du service de renseignement britannique. Et dans cette réunion, ce tripartite meeting avec les États-Unis, la Grande-Bretagne et la Belgique.
Cominciò dal 51, americani, inglesi e francesi per primi, cominciarono a preoccuparsi di che cosa sarebbe potuto accadere se l'Europa fosse stata invasa. E si mossero in base all'esperienza fatta da due grandi organizzazioni che avevano concorso a organizzare e a sostenere la resistenza in Europa contro il nazismo. Lo Special Operation Executive britannico et l'Office for Strategic Service américain.
Ces réseaux ont été constitués à l'intérieur de services secrets. Enfin, ce qu'on appelle les services secrets, c'est-à-dire du service des renseignements militaires et de la sûreté de l'État.
C'è una grossa discussione sulla legittimità di Gladio, perché per la nostra Costituzione Gladio doveva quantomeno essere dichiarata nelle linee generali al Parlamento. Questo è un problema. Il fatto vero è che ammesso anche che ci fosse la necessità di avere una struttura segreta o riservata, e nei trattati internazionali spesso ci sono delle clausole segrete, però la linea di difesa di questo segreto deve andare da un Presidente del Consiglio e essere il Presidente del Consiglio che entra. Il Presidente degli Stati Uniti eletto passa 2 mesi a essere informato di quello che esiste. Quindi se il primo Presidente del Consiglio che ha autorizzato Gladio doveva dare questa informazione ai suoi successori, e quindi doveva essere questo. Noi invece abbiamo trovato che, avendoli interrogati quelli che sono rimasti vivi, che una parte sono stati informati in un certo modo, molto sommario, come vi dirò, altri non sono stati informati affatto. Il senatore Fanfani, che è stato Presidente del Consiglio 6 volte, Ministro degli Interni alcune volte, Segretario della Democrazia Cristiana e segretario molto forte, non è stato mai informato su sue testimonianze, sul fatto che non esistono. Non è stato mai informato. Altri non sono stati informati.
Only those people who were friendly to American aims and policies.
What happened?
Just got a claim. 1 sec, we will come back up.
It looks like it's back, man.
YouTube, you assholes.
Yes. Yes. Last week I was on my second strike, and then I had a strike fall off, and then they had to put me back on.
Anyway, what are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are, it obviously made some folks very uncomfortable. And it's amazing. You know, I've been watching the chat, you know, throughout the video. And one of the things is somebody had posted something about history. And there's a saying, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. Yeah. So, and they're trying to keep this stuff away from us because they want us making the same mistakes over and over again, so that way they could profit. So, yeah, it's and then the Operation Gladio. To be honest, I didn't even know what it was until you said something yesterday about it. And then I realized what it was, and oh man.
I'm trying to teach so we don't freaking repeat history.
Yeah, I try to do the same thing because we can't keep making the same mistake over and over again. That gives them power.
I'm sorry, but the government will not control any one of us.
No, they definitely cannot. And that was never the framers' intention for the government. Not through the Declaration of Independence, not through the Constitution, not even through the Articles of Confederation. So it's become more apparent in the last, I would say, I'd go with 15 years. Because if you look at all the stuff that was passed through the Obama, or as some people call them, the O-vomit, and then, you got a stark contrast between him and then when Donald Trump took office, and he was trying to get rid of a lot of the sanctions and a lot of the different BS, but also make sure the people were taken care of. And then you got ᖏ▃
Joe Toto is actually a boomer.
Yeah, I have a video posted up on my page where where O-vomit is talking to a group of people, and he basically admits to him not being a U.S. citizen, and his last words were, and I'm a prime example of how if you do things through dishonest means, you can get anywhere you want in America. Yes, all this information that you put out is phenomenal. That's awesome.
Ghetto go suck a donkey dick, won't ya?
What was that?
Ghetto go suck a donkey dick, won't ya?
Hey, I'm wondering if ᖏ▃ has to watch every move he makes because he's afraid Kamala's going to kick his feet out from under him on the steps. Well, hell, he can't even walk up steps to begin with.
So I have one last video that is sickening.
All right. Yeah, I don't know about all you, but I've never seen that many cows just kill over because of heat. My grandparents used to raise cattle, and something had to have happened to those cattle to make them do that. Now, I will say that if they get, I think it's alfalfa mixed in their grazing area, it will do that. But generally, they're really sick beforehand, and there would be some sort of, yeah, that pretty much does it. Yeah, they tried to starve out the Native Americans by killing a buffalo, like Faith, Hope, and Charity said. It's and then we've got the mistreatment. So if they're following history, because first it was the buffalo, then it was they started marching the Native Americans across country to put them on reservations. So does that mean that we're going to have another Trail of Tears and Trail of Death? That's, I don't want to even think like that, but
I think it's pretty sickening what lengths our government goes to try to make us comply. Keep pushing and see what happens.
Yeah, it's going to get to a point where people are going to say enough is enough, and I think we're already there. But at this point, one has to wonder if it gets to that point, if anybody is actually going to do anything. I know I would, but I'm just one person. So it's going to be... Oh, I'm sorry. It's not alfalfa. I think it's clover that does that to cattle. I think it's clover. It's one of the two. I can't remember which one it was because it was a long time ago. My grandparents used to raise cattle.
I would if it came down to it. I'm in this to help our children have the best future possible.
Yeah. Yep. See, Robert, there we go. And that would be considered a trail of tears or trail of death. So, I mean, and where I live, every year we have this big thing in September, and then we have one in April, and then we have one in September. The one in April is called the Red Bud Festival, and then the one in September is called the Trail of Courage.
Well, hey family, thank you for coming tonight and learning about operations that our government sneakily set up behind our backs. Any final words, brother?
Yeah, keep your head on a swivel. Watch for watch for things that are bogus, and whatever you hear on mainstream media, if you watch mainstream media, is when you hear something, think the exact opposite. And if you have questions about something, do your own research. I mean, it's the information's out there. You just gotta look for it.
I love you all so much. Have a great night, and you guys are what pushed me to become the man who I am. Thank you for being you.
We need you now. We need you now. One day, one day, one day, I hope you see the truth. This puppet show stays on because of you. We've been dancing with the devil way too long. I know it's fun, but get ready to pay your dues. Oh God, come back home. This crazy world is filled with liars and abusers. We need you now before we're too far gone. I hope one day